Hi guys, TacticalRab again today. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. Covered a very interesting development on Rostermania over the last 24 hours, exactly what the Vegas Falcons are planning to do with their team, but also a couple of tweets emerging that definitely do not entirely rule out the possibility that Atlanta FaZe, despite their dominant victory at the World Cup, could at least be considering making a change to their team, especially if Toronto blow it up as we rumoured a couple of days ago. Could Drazah still potentially be on the chopping block despite the performance at the World Cup? Very much interested your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. It's plenty to get into. First of all, thought this is pretty cool, the top co-streamers. Now, obviously the viewership for the entire tournament was lower than what we saw, let's say, at the World Championship. Part of that, I guess, is time zones. Like, it was actually, for most people, a pretty good time zone. Unfortunately, for those in Australia and New Zealand, it was kind of chalked. But at least early morning in the US and stuff like that. But then again, it's not prime time viewing hours in the Americas. It's, you know, the matches were on earlier than it would usually be the case for the CDL. But it was pretty good for Europe in general. And obviously there were other reasons, because, you know, it wasn't champs, why the viewership wasn't as good. These were the co-streamers though. So Scum obviously taking the top place. Then it was Gataga, who streamed for the Gentle Mates games. I didn't even realize Gunless briefly streamed it, I guess, as well. Of course, massive YouTuber in the Brazilian Portuguese speaking world for Counter-Strike. So I guess he streamed some of this as well. Then Nadeshot, Zuma, even Zeeked was on here at 10k, which I thought was really cool. Methods, Benjay, Nassim, and you know, Colt Havoc as well. Absolutely killed it. Now, to be fair, our channel wasn't like, I don't know, wasn't on it for some reason. We peaked at 6.7 thousand, so thanks for all of you guys who tuned in over the weekend. So we should have been about here between Nadeshot and Ziddy, but you know, whatever. Stream hatchet forgiven. We still had a fantastic weekend out there in Riyadh regardless. But let's talk some Rostermania stuff, because Miami Heretics, they have a roster of 4, and they got absolutely pissed back in Riyadh. I don't know what they were doing in those interim weeks between champs and the Esports World Cup, but they can't have been practicing much because they were getting slammed. That Stallion series, I don't want to talk about it. But the roster of Lucky, MettalZ, obviously Journey is long gone, but Vikul and then ReeaL, that's their roster of 4. What changes would they potentially look to make? Of course, we've talked about Super, we've talked about Renkor, we've talked about other options. We've even talked about the possibility at some point of Snoopy. I know that it seems kind of out there, but like, Snoopy does speak Spanish. So if there was to be an option there for at least a Spanish-speaking team, that's maybe something to consider. But I don't really think that Boston are going to get rid of Snoopy, especially because the big rumour has been over the last couple of days. Doug Sensimartin has effectively taken over GM responsibilities. That may or may not prove to be true. It may not be true. Who knows? But that's what we currently understand. So Miami Heretics say it's Duolingo time. Hashtag take my Vamos. Kind of implying that there's a player they're looking to bring in who is not originally Spanish, right? And I guess today they're going to announce exactly who that's going to be. So what is the plan here? And also, why would you do this before releasing anyone? Because from my angle, that Heretics team, yes, they made champs, but what's the goal of Miami here, right? Are they trying to get better? Are they trying to win at events? Because if they are, and they want to stick with the Spanish thing, and I think it's fine to stick with the Spanish thing. Obviously, I made my points yesterday on Falcons, the fact that, you know, I'm pretty happy with Falcons making the decisions that they have. I think Miami, you know, Heretics should be doing the same, keeping the Spanish team. But I think that there are better Spanish players out there, so if you want to get better, surely you've got to consider a roster change or two. And on this case, it seems like they're considering becoming a more, you know, international roster with somebody else coming on. Now, this was just briefly noted that Noisy actually, you know, tweeted this out of the Duolingo owl thing. So, I don't know, maybe there's something in that. I guess we'll see today who they actually pick up here, because obviously there's been some talk about what they might do. Super spotted by Hixie playing with ReeaL. So, you know, whether there's anything in that, who even knows. But I'd just be surprised if, like, Miami run it back, especially after the World Cup where they were abysmal. Like, if they just run it back with the same team again with like a substitute who's, you know, American but he's going to learn Spanish, it just seems very uninspiring to me. So yeah, I guess time will tell what they do. But it's like, when you go into these Rostermania periods, you expect at least 10 teams to make changes. Obviously the champions will very rarely make a change outside of last year when the Subliners did. every other team will probably blow it up. But the idea that a team that was pretty mid all season, certainly on LAN, and then had an awful time at the World Cup is going to stick just doesn't, there's no way, right? So what, they've confirmed they're bringing in a new player, and potentially that player will end up on their starting roster. I guess time will tell. This is the situation with Falcons, bringing in their challengers roster from the Saudi Arabian side, and they're going to be straight into the league. Obviously, there was lots of discussion on it in the comment section of yesterday's video, and their coach Luti actually goes on to kind of explain what the thought process is here and how things will look from here on forwards, because I wouldn't say it's a guarantee that this team of four is still the team of four at the end of the season, or in the longer term whether this is what Falcons are actually wanting to do. Because in other esports we've seen, you know, Falcons occasionally bring on Saudi talent and then realize, okay, maybe in this particular game it makes sense for us to sign some you know, more veteran players or whatever from the Americas. I guess time will tell. But this is what Luti has to say. Controversy at the minute regarding our recent announcements. This is kind of his explanation on it, about the project and the intentions. The boys started their journey in EU Challengers 2 years ago, and as an organisation, our goal and intentions have always been to enter the league. Our focus has been to coach and develop a full Arab team from a completely new region and showcase the talent and potential within Saudi Arabia and the wider Middle East. We've had many challenges and setbacks along the way that have been out of our control, largely personal visa-related issues, which has resulted in us attending the majority of our events with pickups instead. In their first year, the boys were forced to call out in English, a massive barrier that impacted placements, but that was actually, he says, a good thing in the medium term because it's meant that they can now communicate in both, potentially, of course, meaning they could bring on an English-speaking player as well. He can now communicate in part in Arabic as well. Coach Luti, the team that will represent us next season in the CDL, has been together as a foreign challengers for only 4 months after picking up Khalid midway through the recent season. With that time, the improvements have been massive, which is supported by our online placements, including winning the Elite for European Stage 3. We were faced with more visa issues after this, meaning we had to replace Khalid with another player a week before the Champs qualifier, which ended our Challengers season. They qualified for EWC through the MENA qualifier, and of course were reasonably competitive at the tournament, right? So, you know, he goes on to basically say, this is why they're committing to this roster, and, you know, it's not like I've just picked up 4 Arab players which we found one day in a shipment public match. Like, these guys are legit. They've got great gun skill, good mechanics, and obviously, like, this is a big step, a massive challenge, something that will take time, a lot of hard work. We've received a lot of hate and doubt when we first entered challenges as well, but we gradually gained respect, and we're going to try and do so once again. This is the other interesting one, though, on effectively what they're going to do with the challengers team, because that was my kind of theory here, is that they would just make that roster their challengers roster, and they'd pick up some other players, and then eventually put those guys in. They've gone the other way around, and what they say is they will have a challenger system in North America. We aim to create an academy team with Arab players who will work closely with the main team and compete with the North American challengers next year. We're not limiting the project to only a specific region, and understand that in the future we may need EU NA players to help us achieve future goals, and we'll be prepared to do so should we need to. So pretty interesting assessment there, really. And as Benjay kind of clarifies, current CDL team is the roster of 4 we just mentioned, and they will effectively find the next 4 best players from the Middle East and North African region, bring them to NA to play challenges. If that isn't going so well, if some of those players show promise, they can go up to the main team, or as Luti mentioned, maybe that academy roster might have, you know, 1 or 2 Europe, North American players, maybe like, you know, veteran players or whatever, who can help mold those guys on some level. So it will be very interesting to see. That's the plan, though, to have their academy work closely with their main team, and for it to be, you know, lots of players in that region. I think it's pretty cool for the future of the league. In the immediate term, how good are they going to do? Are they going to get slammed this season? You know, more than likely they're going to have a hard time, aren't they? But of course, it depends in part on the roster construction elsewhere, and if Gen G and if Fnatic come in alongside Cloud9, then, well, you'd imagine they're going to form some decent rosters, but that is definitely not exactly guarantees. So let's talk about this FaZe situation, right? Because they dominated the Esports World Cup, it wasn't even close. But going into the tournament, especially after Champs, there were questions whether they would be doing something, because after Champs, I was pretty sure that, especially if they repeated the result at the World Cup, they would be making a change. I felt like if they didn't win the World Cup, they'd probably be making a change. Things internally seemed kind of chalked. You know, we've talked about the girlfriend-related drama, which I believe has now been resolved, at least in large part. But, and Drazah, of course, played well at the event, but it was really Cellium that completely took over alongside aBeZy. But Drazah's been great this season for FaZe, and, you know, I would have imagined that FaZe would have realised as the season went on that they can't just keep swapping out their fourth and hope it's going to work at some point. Although maybe that's what they're going to try and do, because, you know, let's not forget the Subliners last year, Cloud9 as they are now, they won last year's champs with Priestahh. They decided they could do better with Simp. They made that move. Did they get better? I would say maybe they did. It's just the other teams around them got better as well. And whenever you make a change, you introduce more problems. You might create some solutions, but there's always pros and cons to everything. But Drazah says, I must have been, you know, ... Doesn't really say anything else. Difficult to read into exactly what he means. But there was just a couple of tweets here, and I think the chances of Drazah actually going and then making a change are probably like 1 or 2%. I don't really see it happening now after the World Cup result. But then again, there's only one way this could possibly happen, and that's if Scrappy was to potentially be available from Toronto. We don't know if that's the case. I don't think it will be the case for him to be available, but he might be gettable, right? He's not going to be available, as in we could just go and pick him up for free, but it might be possible to do it. And Keeks, of course, Drazah's girlfriend, also says some other couple, you know, cryptic stuff. Everything changes, nothing stays the same. And then she quotes it to say, change is good, guys. You all guys always think negatively. So I don't know what she's talking about. I'm not trying to speculate. I'm just saying, even though I do like a bit of speculation, I'm just trying to say that this tweet and Drazah's tweet came out at basically the same time. So, you know, either it's probably just, you know, good quality baiting from these two. But if it's not, then maybe there's something going on, and it may be nothing to do with Call of Duty. Who even knows? But, you know, it's at least worth thinking about whether there's any possibility there, right? Because the Toronto situation is very interesting and potentially quite volatile. They've announced Insight as a restricted free agent. aBeZy, though, is not gettable, at least easily. He might be gettable, but he's certainly not available, if I want to use those two terms again, because he's stuck on Surge with probably a pretty big buyout based on the information we talked about yesterday. So if you're Toronto, how do you try and upgrade from Insight? It's pretty difficult. But if you're committed to saying, look, our team wasn't good enough, we need to get better, then what do? And therefore, if changes are seriously being considered, and maybe CleanX and Insight might be out the door again as we thought they were going to be last year, then Scrappy might be able to force his way out. And if FaZe are on the phone saying, look, yeah, Drazah was good, but we think we can form a real super team if you were to join us, Scrap, then maybe there's something to consider there. And of course, Scrap would have a pretty hard time turning that opportunity down, especially if his own team is actually blowing it up. And the fact that Scrappy is, you know, 2 years into his career, he's 0 for 2 in rings despite getting close. He's got to get one on the board quickly if he wants to go down as an absolute legend of the scene. So, you know, I think it's a pretty interesting set of circumstances. As I say, the chances of FaZe, I think, changing are below 5%. But if Scrappy and the Toronto situation becomes possible, then I wouldn't rule out FaZe at least considering whether Scrap for Drazah is a possibility and whether it might work out in their favour. And, you know, I'm not even going to get into all the potential drama and repercussions of the idea of Scrappy taking Drazah's job after all of their drama. It's too good to be true, I suppose, in many respects. Just one other interesting thing to mention here that I hadn't mentioned so far, but a couple of guys have pointed this out to me, so I thought I'd make it clear that Hook is actually a Saudi Arabian player on some sense. He was born in Saudi Arabia. I think he grew up in the Netherlands. And of course, now Hook is based over in the US. So, you know, this is kind of what people are saying is that, well, maybe Saudi's got untapped potential because Hook was born over there. And that's, of course, an interesting kind of explanation. But I guess the point would be that maybe for, like, Falcons, if they were to sign a player outside of Saudi, like let's say that team of 4 doesn't really work, they need an upgrade in the SMG department or something, could they go and get Hook? I mean, I think that's actually quite likely, right? Saudi born, and, you know, maybe there's a possibility there for the Falcons to actually go and get Hook at some point. I think it's pretty plausible. But I think at this point, the likelihood of them getting formal is practically 0. And look, their Halo season continues. They were in the grand finals yesterday playing against SSG, the OpTic boys, of one of these kind of like online tournaments to prepare for the World Championship. And we can see here the Open Series Week 3 results. OpTic eventually fall just short in second to Space Station representation in the grand finals. So interesting to see how they're preparing going into the World Championship, of course, but if Formula is going to return to COD, that decision needs to be made relatively quickly indeed. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.